Okay, we are about to take this stock Torro Henschel turret King Tiger and put it on an IBU2 base. And we're going to run it on this radio, the Hobby King T6, the cheap 6 channel. So that's the project. Make this thing run on an IBU2 base. So let's get to it. Okay, when I take one of these tanks from stock to hobby grade, usually the first thing I do is I pull this plastic plate out and remove all of the posts and molded stuff on there. So I've got kind of like a clean slate to start with. So that's been done, and the next step will be to reattach the wires that that were split for the Komodo, because this tank's getting an IBU and we won't need that anymore. So as soon as the solder iron heats up, we'll get on that, and that's step one for installing the IBU. Clean the base plate. Okay, once I've got the inside all cleaned out and smooth and ready to go, step two is the mock-up. Try to figure out exactly how I'm going to lay everything out. That involves a lot of test fitting, unless you've got a plan in advance, and that's one of the main reasons I do these things, is to show guys exactly how this stuff can lay out. Now I'm using a 5000 zippy LiPo, but it's about the same size as a regular NIM battery, so you could still use those if you wanted to, or you could use a smaller LiPo and have even more space. One trick I've found, especially with these metal turrets, is just go ahead and pop the turret off the lower hull, or off the upper hull rather, and use that, because there's some real clearance issues in here. For this particular setup, I had to remove the post on this side to give clearance, because I found that with the IBU2, it works just as well if it's standing on its side like this, and that gives you a lot more room to work with. If you lay it down flat, it takes up a lot of space. Let's see what kind of good close-up I can get of the layout for you. Okay, so you can see pretty much how I've got it laid out there. I've got the IBU up on its side. Now, it fits kind of tight right there, but it fits just right. I tried it in a few other places, and I had clearance issues with the underside of the upper hull, especially with this brace back here. But by putting it right where it is there, it fits just perfect. You have to remove that one post for clearance. I also have to be careful with the receiver, because that metal brace I was just pointing out comes through right about here. So I've got the receiver set to where it'll be behind that. Now I'm thinking about going with the two 1-inch Aura speakers. I'll have to move the smoke unit back, but I took a trick out of Eric's playbook, and I always attach my smoke units and speakers and stuff now with Velcro. The screws are nice, but it's just not really necessary. Another thing I didn't do on this one that I do on my Tiger 1s is I did not put the standoffs underneath the plate and make it so that the plate will come out without turning the tank over. If I want to get this bottom plastic plate out, I still have to go underneath to get at this, the attachment screws. So anyway, this little contraption here that you may be wondering about is an amp. Now this was, I told you, Ian sometimes gives me stuff to test out that he sells at his website, and this is one of them. Now this is set up to have two speakers. Okay, so I was going to run the two Aura 1-inch speakers. Obviously I'll have to build little speaker boxes for them. The one thing I don't like about the amp is that the volume control is right there on it, and it cannot be used with a Viper unit. So if I use the amp, I'm giving up volume control from the transmitter. But this tank has a lift off top, so that might not be that big a deal. I'm still working that out. My other option is to not use the amp, use the Viper, and then I would place either the single or a 2-inch speaker, because the IBU only has a port for one speaker. You know, I could split it and still use the two 1-inches, I guess, or I could put a stock speaker down in there. The stock Tigen speakers are actually pretty decent. The stock hang long ones I have found are not so much, but I don't know about the new ones. I will pretty soon though. I just ordered the new Sherman with the very latest electronics from Tigen, so we'll see how that works out. So once everything is mocked up, then I can go ahead with the installation, and I think I've got it pretty much figured out. And like I said, one of the good tricks is to remove the turret, because you are going to have to mock it up and put that turret on there. So let's do that. obviously when you're doing these things, you have to work slow and take your time and, you know, be careful. And preaching to the choir there, right? You guys already know all that stuff. Stop telling us stuff we already know, man. Okay. I've got this set. It takes a lot of this, a lot of getting down and looking through the end with the flashlight to see how everything's lining up and what the clearance is like. I'm going to have to build a box for the IBU2 because that's a metal plate behind there, and we can't have that touching. It drops down on there, and when you got it like this and everything's in, that's how I can look in with my flashlight from this way and see that the receiver clearance is, you know, because you got to remember too that it's going to have the cables sticking up off the top, and you don't want those to get crunched. And there's plenty of clearance. You can't see it from here, but I've checked all this, and everything fits, and the hull top goes down smooth. There's nothing worse than getting everything installed and then going to put the hull top on and finding out that something major is blocked and you got to start all over again. You want to talk about frustration. But this way everything will go in and out. And I've also got here I've got an opportunity to check clearance for the airsoft unit. Now in the Henschel turret King Tiger, that unit sits way up and it doesn't need a whole lot of clearance, but that's plenty, and that's perfect having that space there. Now on the Stug, it's really tight. The airsoft unit comes all the way down to the plate, and you have to have a perfect area for that airsoft unit to raise and lower, or else it'll jam up. And with turreted tanks, it's even worse because as they spin, you can run into clearance problems. But I've checked and won't have that on this. So if you want to put an IBU2 in a Torro King Tiger, I'm thinking this would be a pretty good layout. You can use many different speakers in the rear here, and another reason that I want these speakers in the rear is just for sound, because your only opening really once the turret is on is the screens in the back. But if you can locate your speakers under those screens, that really helps a lot with sound quality. I also looked at a pair of speakers, something like this, which again I would have to make speaker boxes for, but they're just a little bit too large no matter how you configure them to have two. Now if I had one in a speaker box, you know, that would probably work. These are actually pretty good full range speakers. They came out of a Sony television, and they've got pretty good sound. I've hooked them up and played with them. But for this project, we're either going to go with the Aura 2, the two Aura 1-inch and the amp. Now I could add a TPA, and you know, then I could have volume control from the transmitter just like in the Viper, but you know, budget and you know how that goes. So I'll figure out what I want to do with the speakers, and I'll attach all that stuff, and then we'll be back. If you're going to do a lot of work with sheet styrene, making boxes and stuff, you might want to invest in one of these. It's a scriber. They work really great. You just mark your line out, get a steel straight edge ruler. I set it so it's right at the edge of the bench so I don't slam my scriber into the glass. I don't know if it'll show in the video. My hand's probably right in the way, but it really does curl out one curl of plastic along there, and you just scribe it a few times. Start, you know, right close to the edge. You don't have to get all the way off it. After a few scribes, it'll snap right off. Okay, once I've got the layout all figured out, it's time to start prepping the components for installation. So as you can see here, I've made a box from styrene for the IBU, and I have the Velcro attached to the back of it at the bottom. Now, I usually make sure I put the hook part on the component, and the loop part, or the fuzzy part, goes down in the tank. That way I've always got a hook on my components, and I've always got loop in my tank, and it just makes it a lot easier to set things in and out. So I did the box for the IBU2. You can see the notch right here. That's so that I can get the micro SD card in and out easily, because it'll sit in the tank like this, and that micro SD card will be up. It'll be very easy access. Okay, you can see the standoffs that I used. That was to separate the board from the bottom of the plastic case. On the other side of the standoffs, I put 2 nuts that made them just the perfect height. And then I suppose if I ever want to put some kind of cover, I've already got tapped holes in place. I took the amp and I used some standoffs, and on that all I did was just attach a piece of sheet styrene to the bottom to give us a good surface for the Velcro, because you know these boards, they've always got all the little solder connections and stuff sticking out the back, and they never sit down nice and flat. So now they do. I've also trimmed the posts off the smoke unit and attached a couple of pieces of the hook Velcro to the bottom of that, so it'll easily stick right in place. And then I made a dual speaker box out of sheet styrene for my Aura 1-inch speakers. You can see there's 2 plugs that plugs into the 2 plugs on the amp. Pretty sure it's a 15-watt amp. The volume control on it is right here where my thumb is, that round button right there. And I'm not sure how well that's going to work out, and I might talk to Kevin and see if there's some way I can hook a Viper to this thing. I don't think I can, but you know, a Viper is just an electronically controlled potentiometer, so it should work any place you want to put it. I just don't know if I have the skills to do something like this, where it's already been mounted to the board and trying to replace that. But anyway, because it's got a lift off top, it's not a real problem. I can just lift it up and adjust volume. But the speaker box, I'm not sure if that hole for the wires will act as a port or not. I don't really know a lot about speaker boxes, but I just made this out of 40,000 sheet styrene glued together, and I drilled and tapped it for the nylon standoffs. That's one thing I keep around is the proper size taps. These work for pretty much all the nuts and bolts that they use. They usually only use like 3 and 4 millimeter. So that'll be the speaker box. It'll sit right down on the floor. I'll put some Velcro down there to hold it. The amp will be sitting right in front of it. The IBU2 will be sitting right next to that, up against the side of the tank, and the smoke unit will be back here next to the speakers. So now I'm ready to start installing all this stuff. Okay, we've had to go completely back to the drawing board. Now I'm going to leave that other stuff in so that you can see, you know, just exactly what kind of little stuff can trip you up on a really good design. I liked the way I had it before with the IBU along the side, but when I got to hooking everything up, I found that the top corner of the IBU would have interfered with the turret rotation ring. Just not enough space. So I've moved the IBU to the front, and still standing on its side, I've turned the receiver around and checked that for clearance and everything. I ended up having to remove the other post from underneath, but that's no big deal because those 2 posts serve no purpose whatsoever now. On the plastic Virgin tanks, they would have been 2 of the 6 screws that hold the tank together, but we don't need them with the lift off top. So that's what it's going to look like now. The IBU will be at the front with the receiver next to it so we can plug in the channels. The motor wires will sneak around the corner right here to plug in. That's the power wire laying right there, which is that port right there. That'll come up from here and across and plug in. And I'm pretty sure the only thing I have to plug into the board besides that is the smoke unit, with the amp, of course. But so the speaker box still fits, the smoke grill still fit where I wanted to, move back just a little bit further, and I think that's what we're going to run with right there. Okay, so here she is with the new layout. We've got the IBU across the front. I had to trim the sides off the case because it was that close a fit. At the receiver right next to it, there's the amp right there. Dual speaker box behind that. Smoke unit next to that. And a Zippy 5000 LiPo in between all of it. So got my radio here. I'm going to run it on the cheap T6. So cross your fingers. I'm going to throw the power. We're going to see what happens. We got lights. We got sound. So far so good. And we got machine gun. Now that's the machine gun I really like. So if you see this, Ian, thanks buddy, he hooked that up for me. Machine gun. I'll have to pull the SD card to get rid of that track recoil. We all know how I feel about track recoil. Let's see if she'll start. Ha ha! Success! Let's try the smoke unit. Oops, that was momentum. Smoke. Make sure it turns the right way. Excellent. Turn off the smoke. Alright, let's try out this amp that Ian sent me. We're at 0. Full volume. Okay. Time to reinstall the turret and take her for a test drive. Okay, here we have the Torro Henschel turret King Tiger, and we have just installed the IBU2. So we'll run through the functions. Lights work. Machine gun works. Cannon works, kinda. Turret rotation. Elevation. Full speed. Drives just like an IBU, just great. So there you have it. There's one way to install an IBU2 base in a Torro Henschel turret full metal King Tiger. Hope that helps, and we'll see you next time.